Hey everybody, I'm Melinda Plue. I am Director of Advocacy and Chapter Development for the ARC of North Carolina. We are an advocacy organization for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families. That term is also known as IDD, and we will say that throughout the length of this video. With me today is my friend Sherisse. I got to know Sherisse recently when she had an issue crop up with regarding her child in the school system and needing a bit of advocacy from our organization, and we worked together so well. But it led us to think about that there are so many other families out there that may be walking through some of the same issues that Sherisse and her family are, and they may have questions, or they may just want to prepare for the future, for what life could look like, how they can dream for their child with IDD. So Sherisse, before we get to our questions, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Melinda. As Melinda mentioned, my name is Sherisse Marion, and I have a daughter who is 15 years old. She is a rising freshman. Her name is Samantha, and we call her Sam. So she was born with IDD, and we started early intervention when she was 12 months old. We started off with physical therapy, PT, occupational therapy, which is OT, and speech therapy. And she learned a lot as she transitioned into the next stage of her education and progression. She started the school system at age 3, and she had an IEP, which is an individualized education program. Through the IEP in the school system, I learned a lot. I was definitely that parent that did not take yes or no for an answer. I was constantly questioning the plan that they had for my daughter. Did not take, if they said no on a certain plan, I'd say, no, I want you to test her again. And so I became Sam's voice over the years. And I thought it was really important for me to share that love with other parents that are going through this, because it is not only, it's very fulfilling, but it's also scary, especially with being a parent with a child that is young and just getting started. And so Melinda and I met because I had, for many years, was using an advocate that we paid for. And, throughout the years, I was like, I want to see if I can do this on my own. And so again, I met Melinda, and she was like, here, this is what we do. This is what the ARC does. And so she joined me at our IEP transitional meeting, which happened this spring. And it was like a breath of fresh air for me. And so at the end of it, I realized I had a lot of questions. And so it's kind of what brought us over here. So
it is. That's exactly how it happens. And, and there are so many parents out there like you that kind of know how to navigate the system enough to get what they want for their children. But there are so many others out there that don't even know where to begin, what to think about. They're just so worried about the crisis of the day. And we understand that. And I will also say that quality advocacy isn't something that somebody should have to pay for. So the information that we can provide to you and to other families is something that we're happy to share. So what we did, listeners, is we came up with a list of questions that we thought that represent the questions that many families have. So I'm going to ask Sherisse if she'll just start asking me some questions, and hopefully we can have a conversation about it and help other families learn along with Sherisse.
Yep. Okay. So my first question is, what is an innovations waiver?
That's a great question.
Why is it important for a child to have one?
Yep. So the Innovations Waiver is in North Carolina a full circle of support for a person. Now there's a waiting list for this waiver, but once a person receives the waiver, and I'll explain some of the services, they have access to a full complement of services, to include respite care, meaning a break for the caregiver, community living and support. So sometimes you'll see folks in the community that have what looks like like a one-on-one person or what we call a direct support personnel working with them. Those are generally and often services associated with this waiver. The waiver has a dollar figure attached to it. So based on a person's disability and their level of need, the state assigns to them a budget category, and families can use that money to waive being in traditionally what you could have, somebody could have been institutionalized for back many, many moons ago. That's why they call it a waiver, is that families are waiving their right to put their child somewhere else and use those services and those dollars in their community, if that makes sense.
I was going to ask you why they call it the Innovations Waiver. So that kind of answers my
every
question.
state has their own waiver program, and they call it something different in every state. In North Carolina, it's called the North Carolina Innovations Waiver. So sometimes we just call it the waiver. Sometimes we call it innovations. Sometimes we just call it the golden ticket, because it often signifies that a family is getting services that other families are still waiting for. And that's the other point that I want to make, Sherisse, is that there is a waiting list for these services, the innovations waiver services. And it's very long in North Carolina. It's one of the things that we are advocating to change, but we want families to go ahead and get on that list, the Registry of Unmet Need. It's called the RUN, or the waiting list. You hear all the acronyms, it's very confusing. And we want families to kind of know about that so that they can get their child's name on that list as soon as possible.
How long is the wait time typically?
It depends.
Okay.
It depends, and slots are allotted by the General Assembly in every budget year, and we only had a few hundred this year, but the wait can be between 15 and 20 years at this point. We have just as many people in North Carolina who are on the list as there are receiving innovations waiver services. So it's just very important to go ahead and get on that list, because if we make headway and we really get that list knocked down, then it's a great possibility that that your child or someone's child could start to receive those services much sooner if we make headway in that waiting list.
So this question was really important to me, and I wish I had thought of it when I was when Sam was a lot younger. But what do I do if I'm frustrated with the public school system and my child's IEP?
So I would say that is the number one call that the number one inquiry that we are getting in the advocacy division from families across the state. They are frustrated because their child is in a self-contained setting, and they really firmly believe that child should be, more integrated with neurotypical peers. Or it could be my child has been discharged from speech therapy or occupational therapy, and I really believe they need more. So that struggle, that communication battle, that the power struggle, that is our biggest inquiry at the ARC in the advocacy division. And so I would say two things. Number one, I want families to know what their rights are, both from the student perspective and from the parent perspective, depending on the age of the child. And so it's important for parents to know where those rights are, know what they are, and how to assert them. However, not every family feels emboldened to speak up at those IEP meetings or when there's a challenge. And that's where we or other organizations in our state that we partner with can step in, and we can either attend that meeting with the parent or with the self-advocate, the older teenager who has the disability. And we can kind of model for them what positive communication looks like and how to ask for what we want and what we deserve, while also understanding the limitations of an educational system, honestly. And so that's something important. If communications completely break down, and that happens, a lot of people, stand their ground on either side. There are ways to dispute some kind of conflict with the school system. And we have the ability to show you where that is. Those are all resources that are free, but it's really hard sometimes for parents to know where that is. So Our job at the ARC is to advocate for the person with IDD. We're not advocating for mom or dad. We're not advocating for the school system. The focus is to advocate for the person with IDD. And sometimes that looks different than what a mom or a dad may call us about, or why a school system may call us in. But we stay focused on that. We advocate always in a very positive way, and we hope that communication gets better. And if it doesn't, there are avenues, and we help parents find what those are.
So my child is turning 18 years old. What do I do? What do I need to do in order to set up a system of support for them?
That's a really big question, and I would say that might be the number 2 question that we get, which is why we're doing this today. So, when your child turns 18, now you mentioned that you had 2 children. You have one with IDD and one without, right? In the eyes of the law, when either of those children are 18, they are legal adults, right? Even your child with an intellectual or developmental disability. So at the age of 18, you want to consider what guardianship or supported decision-making looks like for that child, because I can tell you that at 18, that means doctor's offices and oftentimes schools, or anywhere else in the world where your neurotypical 18-year-old is making his or her own decisions. It will also be harder for a parent to insert themselves into the child's life without some kind of formality, whether that's, and it doesn't have to be guardianship, and we can talk about guardianship in a minute. It can be another level of support that is much more empowering for the person with the disability to help make decisions and choices about their own life. But guardianship is one thing to consider, and that is something that a school system will often talk to families about during the later high school years. In North Carolina, a child can stay in school until the year they turn 22 if their disability warrants that. And so oftentimes parents of children who are in more self-contained separate settings opt for their children to stay in school for a lot longer than age 18. There are a couple of other things that I think families should consider as their children are nearing that age of adulthood, honestly. Financially, they want to talk about money, right? So a trust, a special needs trust, which is very different than a trust that you and I would set up. There are a lot of things to consider. You would want to consider possibly an ABLE account, which is a way that folks with IDD can save money without losing any kind of benefit that's being given to them. They would want to definitely apply for whatever assistance they might need to get themselves independent, if that's where the child is. So if that child, young adult at 18, needs to apply for Medicaid based on the fact that they are an adult and not a child in a parent's home, that is something that probably ought to be considered. Hopefully, by the time a child is 18 or getting ready to turn 18, mom and dad or caregiver have already considered putting them on the registry of unmet need, the waiting list for the waiver, and they would be in the system, so to speak, to soon receive some kind of service.
So what does guardianship mean when it comes to the IDD community?
Guardianship is, we like to say at the ARC, guardianship is a status. It's not a service. Okay. So as I said before, when somebody turns 18, in the eyes of the law, they are an adult. So too for people with IDD, unless somebody goes to the trouble, they take the time to go to the clerk of court and they have their child deemed incompetent. And that's a really difficult word to say, but that is the word that is in all the legal documents. You have to be declared legally incompetent, meaning you need assistance in managing your affairs, at which point a guardian can be named. It is often parents, a parent or both parents, depending on what county you lived in. But it is also fairly restrictive in that if a person, just because a person has a developmental disability doesn't mean they necessarily need a guardian. As I mentioned before, there are other ways to support that person in helping them make informed choices that don't involve guardianship. Guardianship would probably be the last resort. But there are several different kinds of guardianship. And this also is something that differs state to state. In North Carolina, you can be guardian of the person, meaning to help them, not make for them, help them make decisions about themselves. So medical decisions, placement decisions, where they live, those kind of decisions. You could be guardian of the estate, meaning you could be you could assist that person with managing any financial affairs, any benefits they're getting, any paychecks for employment. Or that person may need both. And if you need both of those things, guardian of the person and guardian of the estate, we call that general guardian. And that means you can manage both of those things. But in North Carolina, we have other alternatives as well, to include limited guardianship. And there are resources that we can help provide a family to show them what all those options are. And our mission at the ARC is in securing choice and opportunity for people with IDD. That includes providing trainings to the community about what guardianship is, what it isn't, and what it could be.
Thank you. My last question is, what is the significance of Medicaid when it comes to the IDD community?
So I'm gonna share something a little personal to try to explain this. When I first started working in the IDD field many years ago, I did not know the significance of Medicaid. I just assumed that Medicaid meant insurance, health insurance for people who have very, very low incomes. That was my vantage point.
That's what I think it is.
And it is. And let's be honest, many people with IDD as adults are low income because that is the system that is designed for them, right? That's a totally different video. But Medicaid is so much more than health insurance. It is health insurance, and it's fantastic health insurance, and we are so grateful to have access to that. But it is also a gateway for services. So if somebody has Medicaid, not only do they have health insurance, hospitalization, going to the doctors, prescription care, depending on the person, but it's also a way that they can get some services in their home or in their community. If you are Medicaid eligible, you can get services like tailored care management, which is a service for people with IDD who have Medicaid, for somebody to kind of help, we say quarterback their team, right? Help them find resources in their community. There are individual services like supported employment, helping somebody secure a job, working with them in the community. Sometimes housing, again, which is its own video, but having Medicaid or being Medicaid eligible is so much more than just healthcare. So I do encourage as many families as I can come in contact with, if your child is Medicaid eligible, and it's different when you're a child versus when you're an adult, go ahead and try to get Medicaid. It will pay last. It'll pay after any private insurance that you might have. But it is access to so much more than just a doctor's visit and prescriptions. I will say just very briefly that when a family applies for Medicaid because they have a child with a disability and they require that, family income, mom and dad or one or the other income is the determining factor if you are under the age of 18. So often we will get calls of people that don't qualify for Medicaid because their income at home is too high. I will say this: when a person turns 18, their Medicaid eligibility is no longer dependent on what mom and dad are making in the household. It's on their ability to procure their own independent income. And so many, many, many times when somebody turns 18 and they apply for Medicaid and they have IDD, they often are eligible because of their own ability to work 40 hours a week or to as compared to their neurotypical peers, Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does now. Yeah. I know I said I didn't have any other questions, but so my last question really is, how do I get in contact with all of you?
You would be surprised at how small our division is in the advocacy department. But we are so happy to collect inquiries from families, whether it's by web inquiry, by phone, however you can get to us. The smartest and safest thing to do would be to go to our website, which is www.arcnc.org, and everything that you could possibly imagine or want to get in touch with somebody in the advocacy division or in our large service divisions. We have offices across the state. We have a very robust chapter network. But when in doubt, look under the advocacy tab and just get to the advocacy department. And I will, or somebody on my team will help a family get to where they need.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for talking to me today.
No problem. Thank you for answering my questions.